We hopefully will have some folks streaming back in. This is the part of having a guest that I most covet. It's just a longer, calling this a longer, more terrible conversation with David Rosenberg. David, you and I mentioned in the Imagivate live stream that you and I go back 32 years back to freshman year at Northern Kentucky University in the theater program, two wild-eyed, super ambitious theater guys. Just let's step back to 1988. What are some of your memories of the theater, and then what were maybe some of the more formative moments in time that kind of helped propel you forward into the next phase of your life?
I think, coming from high school and, I went to performing arts high school and I had sort of no context for the real world, or anybody outside of that theater department. And then coming to NKU, and I think really, Troy, like you and I were very, very like-minded in a lot of the references, a lot of the humor. And I think my biggest fear was not finding a friend, like not finding somebody I could connect with. And I think sort of meeting you instantaneously, we just sort of knew comedy was what we wanted to do. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we were sort of like a comedy duo, I think, before we even realized that we were. So I think that really helped.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I have two adult-ish daughters now, and having seen them go into their freshman year and trying to remember back to like what it felt like to be that young and that kind of not really knowing your own identity and like where you were headed and what you thought was important and stuff. I think to get quickly into that place where we did sink into a very like-minded way of kind of navigating through a really weird angle on college, right? I mean, like doing theater at NKU was different from any other, and we were our own fraternity. We were our own sort of like extracurricular activities. We were doing shows every single night. It was a very, very different college experience. And one of the things that we did, we created a couple of characters that were ninjas, and we ended up making Lucky Ninjas was what it was called, and we made a short film called Lucky Ninjas, with us running around campus, trying to silently kill people on campus.
Hmm.
But then found our way into shows and getting a little bit more sophisticated in the way that we were acting and kind of working on stuff. And then what part of theater for you, David, do you think was a maybe even a subconscious catalyst for you to start to get into this creative communications world? Do you remember a point in time, because you pursued theater coming out of school,
Hmm.
and you were writing shows with Jimmy and doing some really cool
Hmm.
stuff. Like at what point did your brain start to kind of shift and say like I can do these kinds of things, but in a place where I maybe am helping businesses progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think we came up at a time when we came up in a really interesting time in terms of an MTV and a commercial world, and all of our references are very sort of pop
Yep.
references. And so I think that when I moved to New York, I was doing stand-up comedy. Like that was kind of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do stand-up. And really the way it happened for me was um, I was approached after a set by somebody who said, "You're really funny. Do you want to write for me?" And it was sort of a dot com when they were called dot coms, and I ended up sort of in that world, writing sketches for an interactive engine,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I sort of just stumbled my way into this world of advertising. I kind of knew that um, I loved sort of commercials, and I loved that sort of very quick, you know, um, communication, very, very quick, sort of punchy kind of work. Um, and so ended up in Miami with my wife, sort of lied my way into an agency, said I was a producer, wasn't a producer, and then kind of sold a radio spot as a producer. And then they said, "You're really great. Do you want to be a writer?" And that's sort of how I fell into it. And I think what's interesting about that work, the work that I've done is, you know, comedy is you're sort of looking at things from every different angle. Um, there's this sort of main idea, and how do you sort of poke holes in it from every angle, and that just really translates to the work that we do in agencies, right? What's a different way to look at it? What's a different way to turn it? What's a different way to spin it?
Yep.
Um, and that's always worked for me. So
That's thought worst jumped in to say why can't we keep thinking as freely and weirdly and lucky ninja-ly as we did when we were 20? There's certainly some wisdom in that, right? That
yeah,
maybe in those early days of you writing for a .com and not really actually having not come out of ad school, you really had no expectations for what that needed to be, and probably those people that were running a startup really weren't
yeah,
sure either, right? And so
yeah.
you got into stuff in a pretty loose way. Is there do you see a difference? And if so, like what is it? It certainly just can't be that we're older, but like there's time where you can maybe take chances on terrible ideas that maybe you can't do as much now, or do you find that to be true? Do you still see as many opportunities to be doing terrible ideation and trying and risking and doing the weird other thing as you did back then?
I think I remember somebody saying, when you're young, I actually think it was somebody that you and I, a director that you and I had, who would always talk about when you were a kid, you would just sort of go to the neighbor kid's house and say, "Hey, you want to play?" And that idea of, we don't know what we're going to do, but we're just going to play and see where it takes us. And then the older you get, you sort of put walls up, like, well, I can't do that because I've tried that, and I can't do that because that doesn't work. And so you narrow your sort of field of vision. And then I think what happens is you get a little bit older, and instinctively they're good ideas, but it becomes more and more challenging to sell those ideas through to people who have ulterior motives. So I'm a client, am I going to put myself out there? Am I going to lose my job if I put this terrible idea or this great idea up? Or it was much easier to just, let's play. Let's do a thing. Let's play. Let's get it out in the world and see what happens. I think creativity has really, if you look at social media, the way that people are being creative, there's a real freedom there. And I think when you're talking about a lot of money and clients that are paying a lot of money, there's a fear of putting money against ideas. So can we get back to a time when, let's just make something? A lot of this work is disposable, if I'm being honest. It really is. It does a thing, it appears, and then it goes away. So it is challenging. It is challenging to get, you come up with a great idea, and then the next thought is, how am I going to sell it?
Mm-hmm.
And that shouldn't really be in the consideration set. It is, unfortunately.
It is, but it's interesting. Maybe go back to the moment you shared earlier about the Chrysler work that you were doing. Chrysler exist anymore, by the way? Did they go?
They do.
They do.
Yeah.
They still do.
They do.
That's great. Congratulations, Chrysler. What was that like? So take us back into that room when you pitched the anti manifesto spot with Bill Murray and all of that stuff. And what was the tagline that you pitched?
Chrysler, we never learn. And that was a year after they were bailed out.
Oh my God. So what was that like?
Timing.
Take us into that moment in time when that unfolds in the room. What like how did well, maybe get us there, right? Who gave you the green light to take that into the room? Were you in charge? Were you calling the shots all the way across the board, right? So like to help us understand how that moment occurred in front of clients, because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, what we realized was that it was an opportunity for our agency to pitch Super Bowl spots, and as I mentioned before, you don't get a lot of opportunities like that. And we were pitching against Wyden Kennedy, right, who had come up with the Eminem spot and the iconic Halftime in America spot. And because we had done some great work for them, a lot of digital stuff, they were like, "Hey, take a shot." And so I think there were probably about 10 ideas that were presented, because we wanted to come really strong. Um, and it was really the first time that I had been aware of the idea of, let's give them stuff to kill.
Yeah.
If you know that, and folks that are listening, right? A lot of times you present ideas to clients so they can feel like they're doing something. So you give them ideas that they can kill. And our idea was one that they obviously served up that the client would kill. Didn't realize that at the time, because we were like, it's Bill Murray, we're going to have Harold Ramis direct it, Eminem's going to be in it, it's going to be massive. So I remember reading the script, and there was a lot of just sort of awkward silence. And then you used to print things on boards, and we had easels all around the room, and it was like the marketing director, and I think there was some VP of something, and somebody else, and head of accounts, just a lot of sort of those folks. And I remember turning the board around, and it had Chrysler logo, "We never learn." And it was an incredibly awkward silence. And I think it was, you presented like, "We never learn." And then processing, a lot of folks just processing. Are they serious? Do they really think we're going to do this? And then I just remember the old, like, one of the guys pushing himself away from the table to make a point and just saying, "Why do you think we would ever put that on television?" And then it all just sort of, who knows what happened. It was sort of tunnel
So
vision. I think I'm
good.
going to pass out, that kind of thing.
That's so good.
But you have conviction, right? You have
Right.
conviction in a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Complete conviction. So
Um, one of the things that M Squirrel, thanks for chiming in, wrote, it's choice manipulation in behavioral economics with a Canadian spelling, by the way. Um, yeah, that's really interesting that that you weren't even fully aware of that strategy at the time, right? That yours was like sort of the sacrificial lamb that was going to go to the fire
yeah.
before they actually showed the stuff, and that they'd be able to pivot off of, hey, we know you felt really uncomfortable, push yourself away from the table, uncomfortable about that one, so now you can feel better about this one that we're about to show you. And there is real deft strategy and kind of like teeing up your idea options. But there's something really interesting about a terrible idea being sent to die to serve the other ideas, that
Right.
and maybe how often does that idea kind of like at the last second loosen the ropes, and jump
Yeah,
off of the
sure.
plank and bounce back up and kill everybody and survive. It's not impossible, and there's something really special about the fact that was even allowed in the consideration set. I think it's important to know that terrible ideas can actually provide a real value in a mix like that, even though they may not be intended to survive.
But it's relative. I mean, a terrible idea is, to you, a terrible idea is an amazing idea to somebody else, and it's sort of the context, right? How many products are in market that probably were terrible ideas on paper, but the way they were positioned, the way they were sold, the way that they were pitched, somebody's like, "That's a brilliant idea." And a lot of times those ideas are, um, "Wow, I wish I would have come up with that."
Yep.
Right? How did somebody come so easy? Terrible, but they made $1 million. And I always heard that we all have, every one of us has at least a single $1 million idea a year. It's how you execute it. And they could be terrible, but it's how you position it. It's how
Yeah.
it comes to life. So, you know.
So you talked a little bit about um, you and I were kind of talking a little bit about social media before we we actually activated the stream, and you had some experience with VaynerMedia, and they take a very different approach to advertising, marketing, and sometimes I think controversially so, right? But what were some of your learnings coming out of that experience? And again, like in this territory of being able to try to, you know, be a risk taker, be thinking outside of the convention, taking something to an uncomfortable place. Any notable anecdotes from that experience?
I think what was so great about that work is, um, what was so what was so great about that work is it actually wasn't a social media agency. It was an attention shop, and
Hmm.
that's what it was sort of billed as. And so, what is the thing that has the most attention? And how can we exploit that thing? And sometimes it was social media, or sometimes it was radio, or whatever it was. So we weren't really married to any platform. And I think what I learned from that was ideas don't really need a lot of um, um, thinking and overthinking and redoing and redoing and redoing. Make a thing, put it out into the world, see how the market reacts, bring it back, adjust it, put it back out, because you're getting real time feedback, right? You're getting real time feedback. You're getting comments, you're getting likes, you're getting, if they hate it, they hate it, but it doesn't really matter. I think so. That's really important. Is ideas are subjective, and the only way that you can really know if it's a good idea or a terrible idea is just put it in the world. But our ego gets in the way. Um, and you need clients that are okay with that, right? If it fails, great. We didn't put a lot of money behind it. It's a terrible idea. It's not going to tank our business. Go ahead and do it. And then the other thing that I really learned was the only way to succeed and the only way to get attention is to be polarizing. Um, and if you look at the way the world works today, the people that have the loudest voice are the ones that are the most polarizing. Um, and that's the only way to break through.
Well, and and I would argue that oftentimes it's done almost gratuitously, right? I mean, it's easy to be polarizing. That's not
Mhm.
hard, but
Sure.
it's challenging to create a tension that causes the right conversations to happen. Thoughtworst had said before, you know, when you're talking about the Chrysler Never Learns spot, you know, the Super Bowl was all about getting people to talk the next day. It wasn't, you weren't trying to sell anybody on anything, right? You weren't trying to
That's right.
you were just trying to become relevant in pop culture for a
Hmm.
moment in time, and
Hmm. Hmm.
that's where something polarizing would absolutely be able to take
Hmm.
off, right? And it's
Hmm.
interesting that you know, when social media, particularly, but digital to a greater extent, allowed us to spend less, test and learn more. It's funny how it still hasn't seemed to made enough clients comfortable enough to
Yeah.
to try it, right? I mean, like I think we've been so programmed to know that, oh my god, we got to get this solid gold insight down, and we've got to do all of this research and make sure that we're talking to exactly the right people, and then we spend all of this money to get a big message put together, and that's I think that's so deeply programmed in clients' minds, particularly that when you are now we're in the thick of this digital era where you can do a lot of Vayner media esque kind of testing and learning, and I think people still are reluctant to do that. You coming back to your career, you moved from agency recently in just the past couple of years to go more towards client side.
Yeah.
What sort of sensibilities were you able to kind of take and preserve with you from your agency world, and what are some new like ahas that you have being on the responsible client end of things that maybe is sort of revelatory for you as far as like what we miss as agency folks?
Yeah. I think what's interesting is your context in an agency is you're talking about the work, you're thinking about the work, you're producing the work, you're making the work. And so you assume that clients are thinking about you as much as you're thinking about them. And the reality is, you know, clients are thinking about their agencies probably 5% of the time, and the other 95% of the time they're worried about, Bob in the warehouse lost his arm, or the truck filled with product went off the rail. They're worried about real things.
Right.
And so as an agency, it's your job to make their job easier. And so a lot of times it used to be, the best time was like when the agency came, and that was when the clients could like sort of like let their hair down, and it was fun and they were with the cool kids. Now as an agency, you have to understand their business, you have to understand their context, and you have to bring them ideas that don't get in the way of everything else they're worried about. Unless they want to be, unless they want the world shaken up.
Yeah.
So my job was really to listen to customers, consumers, respond to them in real time. A lot more, just you're really responsible for a lot more metrics. Like, did this thing sell this thing? Did this work do this thing? And it was very sort of one-to-one. And clients aren't dealing in months, they're dealing in days, they're dealing in minutes. You know, and so agencies need to be as fast as clients. So if an agency says that's going to take us 2 months, for most clients that doesn't work. I need it in 2 days. And so the entire agency model needs to be reoriented around the speed. And that for me was like a real eye opener. Like, you've got to be fast, you got to be efficient, and you have to come up with ideas very quickly, put them in market. If they work, great. If they don't, pull them down, put something else up.
Yep.
And agencies aren't designed to work that way.
Right.
They're just not.
Despite the fact that I think we talk a big game around digital transformation and all of these things, and I think we have been outpaced by clients to a large part due to just the fact that the demand of the market, demand of consumers, and agencies just have never. I don't think we have the same sort of pressure to perform differently than the actual client does, and so it's interesting to think about, and I'm glad to hear you say that about that clients think about their agency's fractional part of the day, right? And there's so many other things. We've got a lot of agency folks in the audience, and I'm sure we're all preaching to the choir. We understand, all this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Like, now that you're out of the agency world, though, like, for people who, hi, Kazim Matthias, coming in from BBDO Brussels, by the way. We've got some other agency folks, but I think as we continue to expand this audience and engage with people that are coming from all different creative walks of life, now that you're sort of client side and you're thinking about this differently, what are some more sort of general principles around trying to break convention in the way that you're thinking? Are you doing things with your teams? I know you've led different types of creative teams, client side. That is there a different way to kind of go about this stuff that we just aren't getting as agency folks?
I think as agency people, one of the, and a lot of the agency folks will know, is we spend a lot of time in the politics of the agency. We spend a lot of time wondering what that person thought, or Jill didn't say hi to me in the hallway. Am I going to lose my job? Like, and so I think that when you layer that stuff on top of ideas, your ideas don't work because you're worried about, right? I got to worry about what this person thinks, this person thinks, this person thinks, and then I get to the client, and so there's so many different layers. And so I've always tried to protect my teams from that. Let me take the hits. Let me worry about that stuff. From your perspective, everything's okay, and let's not worry about anything. And so I think if you create an environment where people just are free to come up with terrible ideas, come up with great ideas, and you really protect the work, and you try to make the conversations about the work, and you try to make every interaction about the work, it's much easier to be at work, right? I don't, it just make it about the work, because that's really why we're all there.
Yeah, man. It's interesting. There is a lot of extra personal dynamics that happen on the agency side. And I've always kind of wondered about that. You know, when you go and you dig in a little bit deeper with the client, you see how they operate a little bit more functionally, I guess. Do you think that there's something though to and this is a loaded question. I wonder if there is something about the urgency and the ego that's inherent in the agency world that fuels ideas. You know, like if and I think about some of the time that I spent like in Chicago. You've worked at New York agencies. I mean, the grind is so different there, right? You've got people. It's like an 18-month average tour of duty at any of these agencies. People kind of coming and going, and they're getting ground into like human meal with long hours and stuff like that. Do you think that is where those great and terrible ideas were coming from, or is that just an antiquated concept in that we just need to rewire our brains to think about how to get to ideas differently?
Look, I think, you know, and you know, right, the carrot that's always dangled in front of you in an agency world is if you work harder than somebody else, if you work faster than somebody else, if you work longer than somebody else, if you're always on call, if you're always available, if you're there for nights and weekends, if you like cancel your vacation, if you do all those things, like you're you're very committed. And the bottom line is it doesn't make the work better. Like it just doesn't make the work better. How many first ideas have you come up with that you can't beat? And you can spend 10, 20, 30 hours and that first idea feels really good. And why not develop it? You know, I spent some time in an agency as a freelancer and the average amount of ideas that you would need to bring them in the first round was 30 ideas. That was the first round. And then, you know, they kill 29 of them. And then the second round is another 30 ideas and then another 30 ideas. And so when you multiply that over 20 creatives, yeah, sure, it's an idea factory, but is the work that much better? And I think that's what contributes to the burnout and the politics and the resentment and all those things, because ultimately, you lose a client, you lose your job.
Yeah, right. Kazim Matthias kind of chimes in saying, in his experience, the work of an agency is a one shot that needs to work. We talked about this. It was a little bit different with your time at Vayner, right? But I think that in many agencies, we still are kind of like, it all hinges on this one post that we're creating. It all hinges on this one spot. It all hinges on this one meeting that we're either going to make it or break it with the client. How would you advise people to start to try to break out of that mindset? I mean, how do we, one of the things you said was getting to know the client's business a little bit better. And man, we could surely do with some of that, right? And have a better sense of what are all of the factors that are at play. Because I think we'd probably be bringing them a lot more better or terrible ideas in that case. What do you see hope for agencies to kind of recalibrate? And a lot of it I think is, and look, folks, by the way, we're lifting the hood on this. I get pretty honest and frank about this. The agency model is broken. This whole fee for services kind of business model really doesn't help anybody, and especially the client, right? I think one of the things, David, that you were saying about getting 30 ideas and all of this like grind, sometimes agencies just need to make the hours, right? They got to punch the hours through the hoops so that they can bill the client and they can survive. But and I think if you were selling ideas, not the time to get to the ideas, it might be a different thing. But what do you see? Like what is your advice for agencies to kind of recalibrate, maybe reimagine the business model to get to a different place?
That's a tough question. I think and I'll sort of reframe it, right? Because I think that you and I and probably a lot of those folks that are commenting have heard for many, many years the agency model's broken, the agency model's broken, the agency model's broken. I think what agencies at their best have always been good at is reflecting culture very well.
Yeah.
Like really reflecting culture and doing it in a really smart way and doing it in a surprising way. you know, in many ways, I think like this is an incredibly creative time to be alive because there's so many different ways, right? I can be some kid in the, you know, in his room playing a guitar and suddenly I'm, you know, world famous, or I can, you know, have some stupid YouTube channel and suddenly I'm like, you know, in the movies. So it's a really incredible time to be creative. And I think as agencies, we try to, you remember when it was like, we need to come with a viral video.
Right.
We need to come up with a viral video, which is the most ludicrous thing you've ever heard. I think as agencies, like, embrace what's happening, let creatives be creative, um, and try to remove the roadblocks.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about, you know, next time you're in a meeting, look around the table, see how many people in their meeting, and see how many people are actually adding value. You're probably gonna, if in a room of 10 people, maybe two of them. And, you know, trim agencies, trim it back. As a creative, you always want it to be about the ideas, but really embrace the ideas and let creatives be creatives. I think the other thing is when you walk into an agency, you put on your agency hat
Mm-hmm.
and you forget that you're a human being. You forget, what I watch this. I'm a human being.
Yeah.
What I watch this. Um, and I think that's really important, is to just remember, like, just because it's, you know, you clock out for the day, you don't become somebody else.
Right.
Um,
You talked about culture, agency being on the front line of culture. M. Squirrel asked, better strategists. Creatives would be well served to be better aligned with planners and strategists. They may have a horse in the race there, M. Squirrel, and I totally agree with it.
yeah.
Where do you see the big wins? The what's your experience on the client side with the strategy coming from agencies? Where is it in a good place? Is it heading in the right direction?
I mean, I think, look, my favorite people in agencies are strategists. Um, I mean, really, really good ones, like really insightful ones, really ones that find that little kernel of something that just becomes, you know, a $1 million idea. Um, and you know, it's funny. Though I talk about it like, sometimes when you're coming up with ideas, or sometimes when you're working with a strategist, there's that moment when you fall in love with them. They give you something and you just, you know, I love you, my God, like, I'm so inspired by that thing.
Yeah.
um, and they're out there, and I think, um, look, on the client side, clients like to think they know everything about their consumer. A lot of times they do. um, and as an agency, if a strategist can walk in and say, here's who your people are, here's what we know about them, we understand them, we understand what motivates them. um, Again, that goes back to the point of understanding the realities of your client and understanding your client almost better than they do.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about a big client, I don't know that they're going to shift their strategy because of a tweet that somebody found,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think, for better or for worse, right? Because I think that there's you can build an entire fort out of foundational consumer research and what you understand. And again, it's impossible to argue the data in many cases, but I think that's the thing that I think has me most worried. You know, heading into 2021 is the data driven stuff, the data driven creativity. Mindset of programmatic
mhm,
performance marketing, you know, all the stuff that actually a lot of the folks that are here and in my organization are doing very well.
mhm,
But you know, that fortitude around truth that's coming from data sometimes just creates you know, bleak spaces for interesting and unexpected terrible ideas to occur and maybe exponentially change the outcome of the business for the client. It's to me that's our big challenge over the next 5 years probably as agency folks is to figure out how to embrace the truth and also kind of combat the truth of data, to try to push it to something more than just incremental benefit, you know?
You don't get into this work because you don't get into this work as a creative because you say, I want to come up with great data-driven ideas.
Some people do.
Maybe,
Some people do.
maybe. I didn't.
Yeah.
I did it because I wanted to take all the really stupid ideas in my head and put them out into the world.
Yeah.
Um, the data is the data. You can't argue it. But then you have to, the flip side is, are you going to embrace the work that comes out of data-driven creativity?
Yeah.
And if you can, if great, more power to you. If that's the kind of work you love, fine. But I don't know that that's the kind of work that a lot of creatives love and gets them excited.
Yeah. Well, David, you and I we've talked about we had a podcast idea that was pretty terrible that we tried to pilot together once. We've had a few other things like that have kind of come up, live show type things and stuff like that. Are there any terrible ideas that are like living in the back of your brain that you just are desperate to give a chance to, give some light to? Dream projects or things that you always wish you tried and just haven't taken a swing at the plate?
There's so many. You think about them, you put them away. I actually had a thought about doing um, live, sort of playing out scenarios on the subway.
Mm-hmm.
So playing out really bizarre situations on a subway with performers. And sort of doing, it's almost like I guess it was like sort of like 1960s, 1970s, like theater of cruelty or theater of the absurd, right? And just have these things sort of play out.
Yeah.
Never really came to life, especially now. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I would love to do those sort of things where you're just, you're reframing people's reality in front of them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder if that is the next echelon of mixed reality, right? That virtual reality, augmented reality, but is there going to be like the next transcendent alternative reality that's actually just real reality again, because we don't have those kinds of encounters, right? If you can have all that entertainment kind of piped right into your neural chip. We talked about the Elon Musk neural link thing, but maybe it's real people that are going to be the new horizon of alternative reality.
I mean, we keep pushing ourselves and pushing ourselves and pushing ourselves physically, right? You look at these, like, I don't know, mutter and like 100-mile races, and like we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing because we're human beings and that's what we have to do.
Yep.
So I think that's right. Is how can I feel something? I think the next reality is, I want to die and then bring me back to life. Like that'll be the ultimate thing. Like,
yeah. There's some really good Philip Dick stories about like can't remember which one it was. I think it was called Ubique is the name of the book, but basically one of the main tenets of the book is that when people die, they get sort of frozen in this process that keeps the half-life decay of their actual soul dying, and it freezes it, and then you put them in these units where loved ones can come and visit and sort of activate the half-life again and be able to communicate with them sort of through this like neural link kind of thing and ask questions and stay connected, but time's running out and you can just use it as much as you want. But that's interesting thought about like consciousness, the decay of consciousness as a next level alternate reality kind of experience.
I actually saw something about so it actually started as it's getting a little dark, but it started as a group started interviewing people that had survived the Holocaust and asked them tons and tons and tons and tons of questions. And basically what you can do is as a human, you can interview the hologram of this person. So I can actually ask them questions and they're seated in a chair and you can have a conversation with somebody. So when they die, their consciousness sort of still lives in this augmented reality. And what they've done is they're imagining the technology for, can I bring Lincoln back to life? Can I bring Einstein back? Can I bring all these people back and sit across a table from them and have a real conversation with
Wow.
them? So basically, we never die.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah,
Never die. That's a terrible idea.
never
I
die.
can't wait until that sweet, sweet final sleep comes. I'm so tired.
That-
David, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for just an awesome morning. I'm glad we got a chance to catch up. Thanks for taking the time to get in there and be silly and riff with us. Thanks for some less silly conversations, some really interesting concepts. Any last questions for David before we wrap it up? David, is there anything else any thoughts that are just kind of burning in your brain that need to come out in this venue?
Look, I think this is great. I think it's having the freedom to fail, and having the freedom to tap into terrible ideas. Um, we, you know, I, I just love what you're doing because the idea that we have to be perfect and we can't come up with terrible ideas in front of somebody, um, you know, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's just sort of a construct. So
I'll
we all
tell you.
have terrible ideas. Giving them a voice is a great idea.
Well, I mentioned, thank you. I mentioned this a couple of streams ago, I think, but I think it bears repeating, and that is this runs against almost every natural inclination I have. I talk about, I make things very precious. Creative projects for me are precious. I want them to be perfect. I seek perfection in production, and then to have like a technical stumble almost every show where I either leave the music going because I didn't have the monitor on and I talk for 5 minutes until all my friends are texting me saying like, hey dude, the music's on still,
Mm.
or closing the stream. Like the imperfection of this medium is very foreign to me. It's very
Mm.
uncomfortable. The thought that I'm doing a show and I'm hitting go and I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I with my an hour experience with improv and stuff, that's not foreign to me, but just the idea of not carefully curating the content and writing something and making it succinct
Mm.
is different. And then, just like opening it up to folks that are far smarter than me in many, many different topics and stuff, and just having this awesome nonstop confluence of thinking and building and, you know, um, getting terrible ideas out that I believe that this process is how you get to great ideas. And so, anyway, I didn't want to proselytize that any further. Thank you for the support because I think having you on here, this is what I want to establish. I want to bring as many amazing minds into this process and just continue to figure out what terrible ideas are together. So thanks again, buddy.
Absolutely.
Thank you to everybody who hung around. M Squirrel Ujako has some really great thoughts in there. Maybe we'll kind of tackle that. I'm getting kind of back into the agency client business model. I think we're only just beginning to scratch the surface with that. David, you'll come back and join us again at some point.
Absolutely.
I hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the meantime, everybody, thank you again for being here. Come back tonight if you want to have a little bit of longer form terrible idea exploration. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning for WTRFP. This is it for Imagivate Live, a longer, more terrible conversation with David Rosenberg. We'll see you next time.